Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to apparently like a winter apocalypse for most of us, I would assume. 12 to 18 inches coming on Sunday. I got about half a foot, I would say, on the ground right now up
Phrasing?
here in Connecticut. So listen, there's what, 5 meters of snow in Russia right now. That's
Yeah,
crazy. That is truly insane.
the stuff in Russia is absolutely crazy. Joe, I'm getting there. I'm not going to lie to you. It started snowing on Sunday. There was already some snow on the ground on Sunday here in Grand Rapids. And on Sunday, it started snowing. We are talking right now at 7:43 p.m. on Wednesday. Joe, it has not stopped snowing here.
We're literally going to get like 18 hours, I think, of snow.
We have about 10, 11 inches of snow on the ground right now. I think there's probably another 10 inches of snow coming by the end of the week. And yeah, it is kind of insane.
Wow. Well, look at you. This is why you don't live in Canada. I don't know why you elected to do that. It's your problem. Welcome, everybody. Blueshirtbanter.com. $85 a year gets you all of your ad-free access to the New York Rangers. You can read a variety of stories, of which we post every single week. My Joe's reaction of the week goes up every Friday. We have game notes after every story. There are game threads that you can get into. Chris does his 10-game temperature check, which, spoiler alert, is low. We have a lot of stuff up there.
Media
right
Bites.
Media
Subscribe
Bites.
for Media Bites.
Killing it. So,
y'all are loving it.
Thank you all who are joined up. We love you more than the people who are not. And if you're not, you have an opportunity to join up and be loved. $40 a year gets you access to our community tier. We finally got you into the Discord. We are rocking and rolling there, trying to get everybody who has an invite to actually get inside to make it a little bit more lively. Eric and I and Chip and Roberto will hop in as well. I've informed Eric that this is part of his contract now to be more active in the Discord. And YouTube, blueshirtbanter.com. Or sorry, what am I doing? youtube.com/blueshirtbanter. You can view these. You can see Eric and I. I'm wearing a beautiful blue, kind of sweater thing, hoodie situation. Eric also has on a hoodie, but it's not as nice as mine, so it doesn't matter. And yeah, those are the places to find us. Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Please leave 5 stars. Leave a nice comment. Facebook.com/blueshirtbanter is also a thing we should probably start plugging. That has been humming along on absolutely fine on its own. But just, things that you can do to support us, please do so. And again, give us money. As I go through my tax return for the 2025 season, it is always nice to see the gigantic loss of the company. So you're not supporting me enough yet for me to become an oil oligarch and rich and not have to do this shit anymore. Pick up the pace, ladies and gentlemen. Eric, today is the 68th episode of Blueshirt's Bandwidth. If Chip were on the show, he would have no idea who wore number 68 for the New York Rangers. Chip, it is a gentleman by the name of Jaromir Jagr, who was acquired for Anson Carter, probably the greatest trade. I mean, NHL history, I think it's got to be up there, right? Obviously,
Yeah.
you got Gretzky and a couple of other things, but in the modern era, we'll say Jaromir Jagr until even now, I think he had 123 points, I think, the first
That's
full
correct,
year that he was a New York Ranger. So set a bunch of records, and honestly, one of like the quintessential New York Rangers of my life was Jaromir Jagr, a guy who really put the Rangers back on the map after 7 years of the dark years of not making the playoffs 7 consecutive years. Guess what, ladies and gentlemen? We are on year 2 of this little stint roller coaster ride. So let's see how far it goes. But Eric, how are you, my friend?
Cold, snowed in, as I referenced. Yes, obviously Chip would have no recollection of Jaromir Jagr, especially what number he wore.
Not a clue.
Maybe he would, in a very academic sense, remember Jaromir Jagr, but would have absolutely, if you asked him who wore number 68 for the New York Rangers, he would have absolutely no clue.
Not a clue.
We were talking about this in the Banter Slack about, and we'll get into this with the trade concepts surrounding particularly Artemi Panarin. But Phil is making a really good point about how most trades, especially when you evaluate them in the moment, like these are win-wins as far as the GMs are concerned who are making those transactions. And most of the time that we evaluate trades after the fact and say, like, this was a terrible trade, Most of the time, it is when a young player has been surrendered, typically for an older player, and you just didn't know that that young guy was going to blossom into a superstar. There are exceptions to that, like the Forsberg for Martin Erat trade between the Nashville Predators and the Washington Capitals was one that, at least
In
you
the
can
moment, everyone
understand.
knew was just a disgusting.
You can understand, like, at least what Washington was doing or trying to do, but it's bad, and it looks pretty bad at the
I don't
time
think
as
I
well.
understood what they were trying to do.
Maybe I don't either, and maybe I'm
This
just
has been
trying to be
coming
too
up.
kind to the Washington Capitals,
Yeah,
but
why
yes.
fuck the Capitals? Why are we being kind to the Capitals? This is like the Taylor Hall for I can't even remember the defenseman's
Larson?
name.
Adam
For
Larson.
Larson with the 200, if you have 200 hockey men, Edmonton got what they needed out of this trade. And it's like, no, they didn't at all.
Yeah, they
You're
got
an
worse.
absolute. It's a ridiculous. And look, we're about to kind of talk about that. The Rangers are in some dangerous territory right now with some of the trades that are on the horizon, some of the decisions that need to be made by Chris Drury. And
Come back to the point that I was making, which is I think this is one of the examples, the Jaromir Jagr for Anson Carter trade of I don't understand how at the time, again, the Washington Capitals, thought that that made sense. I mean, you knew who and what Jaromir Jagr was, right? Like I guess the best
I
defense
think
of
he
that you
wanted
can
out,
mount
if
is
I'm
that
not
maybe,
mistaken.
but
I
but
think
if he
Jagger wanted
wanted
out.
But if he wanted out, I think you could do better than Anson Carter for a guy who is an absolute obvious first ballot Hall of Famer. That's really no disrespect meant to Anson Carter. I mean, maybe the other thing that I was going to say is he was 31 years old when that trade was made, and nobody knew he was going to play in the NHL to 45. Or I guess he was 30. Maybe he was 30. No, he was
Charlie's gonna get
31.
you.
Yeah, he was 31. So yeah, it was not a great trade, and but a great trade for the Rangers. And anytime you can have a bad trade for the Capitals and a great trade for the Rangers, I'm in favor.
So I looked this up just because now I'm curious as well. And the Capitals were in money saving mode, and they could not afford his $11 million salary. And this was at a time when the Rangers were like, yeah, we'll take whatever. So that might be part of it. Not to dispute, what you're talking about here, but yeah, if that trade happened in the modern era, look, I do think it's I don't even know actually. I'm going to completely forego that and just say the trade that I continue to reference and will continue to reference as we go through this process is the Mika Zibanejad trade, where the Rangers offloaded Derek Brassard to a cost-conscious team in Ottawa, who actually gave the Rangers a second-round pick in order for the Rangers to facilitate the trade after Brassard's um, bonus kicked in, right? July, whenever it happened. And the Rangers traded Brassard a year too soon, quote unquote. And the Rangers got what was ultimately an unbelievable value in Mika Zibanejad, who at that time in his career and over the past 10 games, where he has 19 points in the past 10 games as of this recording, which is wild, um, was truly like a premier player in the NHL, I think, on some level. And, we've done a lot of revisionist history about whether or not Chris Drury made a major error in signing Zibanejad to the contract he did with all of the clauses in place and everything that he gave him that the Rangers are currently eating right now. But the reality of the situation is coming off some of the seasons that Zibanejad did, that contract was actually a little bit more defendable at the time than it looks right now. And again, Zibanejad, to his credit, is playing some of the best hockey we've seen in 2 or 3 years. All it took was Chris Kreider going across the country to California to facilitate that. But
That has just always been my problem with the analysis of the Mika Zibanejad contract, as everybody bemoans it right now, which is it's similar to trades. You can do some retroactive looking back and saying, if we knew then what we know now, we would do things differently. Okay, that's fine. But you have to evaluate these things when they happen. You have to make those decisions. And I think it was completely logical for the Rangers to look forward for what they thought Zibanejad's production was going to be. And for a
I
while,
mean,
we're perfectly fine and right about all of that. The contract was like, I remember all of us talking, or most of us talking about it at the time, going like, this was really good work. And it was only because things have gotten pear-shaped since then, things you couldn't have known at the time, that it looks bad in some senses. And again, this is something else that's exacerbated by that we in all contract conversations that go back far enough in time, you have to include the fact that COVID happened and that you had no cap growth for a couple of years there,
For
which
sure.
made what otherwise would have been completely reasonable contracts look less reasonable because the cap wasn't growing. So it's just there's a lot of way too much, I would say, evaluating decisions made at that time based on all the knowledge that you have now, which on a level is perfectly fine. We can say like, man, maybe they shouldn't have given out that contract. It didn't age well. But you have to make the decision in the moment. And in that moment, it made total sense to give Mika a contract.
Well, no, listen, not to we don't need to spend time defending Chris Drury. In fact, I think we're probably going to spend a fair amount of time today really kind of putting just some serious questions out there about him. If I'm not mistaken, Zibanejad's 75 points in 57 games. He had 41 goals in 57 games in 1920 was the season before he was extended by Chris Drury, I believe. Charlie will correct me if I'm wrong. And, it's kind of easy to, again, it's today, you wish the clauses weren't in there, right? But I also think that in a really weird way, you're seeing right now this sort of, if we really talk about Zibanejad being this black hole, as he has been, and just a player that's not playing well enough and somebody that the Rangers need more from. If you go back, he has 48 points in 50 games this year. Now, it is very fair to be like 19 of those came in the past 10 games when really nothing matters. So, what are we doing here? But even last year, which we all agree was a tire fire, 62 points in 82 games, 72 and 81 the year before, and 91 and 82 the year before that. Like I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. I do think there is a little bit more smoke that Zibanejad may actually be interested in getting out of Dodge this summer and not necessarily sticking around. And if he does that, Mika Zibanejad, and I'm not suggesting, by the way, that that's going to happen. I'm getting the sense from some of the things I'm hearing that, he might be manicuring a list. Maybe he does want to go to Anaheim, whatever. But he should be remembered as an incredible, incredible New York Ranger who was just truly one of those players that, like, much in the way that we will talk about Artemi Panarin, which is, and I'm sorry for Rangers fan born after 1994, but like any of you who's been a Rangers fan for a long time knows that the normal trajectory of a free agent is the New York Rangers overpay for a very old player who does absolutely nothing and is a complete disaster. And then the Rangers need to figure out a way to get out of the deal if they can.
Mhm.
That's not what Artemi Panarin has been for the New York Rangers. And furthermore, the Rangers made some horrific trades over the years in those Glenn Sather, era days that did not pan out and were complete disasters. And Zibanejad was not that. So there's a lot of guys that I think as we get closer to the trade deadline and as these guys are traded, you and I are going to say a lot of things that are going to be, the antithesis of some of the things we have said about them over the past few months and years. But that is retroactive to what they've meant to this organization. I do think that you have to analyze these things in the present. And
Yeah. I think I want to say two final things about Mika, and then we can get to the ombudsman report and get to the meat of this episode. One is understand the point about the clauses in the contracts. Again, would just remind you that general managers have really been giving those out pretty willy-nilly. I look at the situation in New Jersey where they, not the full reason that they couldn't facilitate a trade for Quinn Hughes, but part of the reason they couldn't facilitate a trade for Quinn Hughes is because they had too many players with no movement clauses, particularly on their defense, who didn't want to waive them in order so that they could bring in Quinn Hughes, and particularly for someone like Dougie Hamilton, bring in Quinn Hughes and have him take your job. So I think it's worth remembering that this is not just like a local Chris Drury problem. This is an across the NHL problem. And then finally, you mentioned it, but I just want to drive the point home. The great what if to me was that 2019-2020 season for Mika. 41 goals, 34 points, or 34 assists, 75 points in 57 games.
That's what I'm talking about. That was when he was signed to the
His
extension.
career high in goals for a season is that 41 in 57 games. The closest he came after was 2022-23, 39 goals in 82 games. There's a part of me that will always want to know, if COVID never happens, what does that full season for Mika end up looking like? Because it was right before COVID happened that you got the 5-goal game from Mika. And then the world just absolutely came to a halt. But that was such an insane season that he was having. And I just really, truly wish we know what the rest of it would have looked.
Yeah, it's again, not everything is in a vacuum. And again, we'll have deeper discussions on these things as we go. But something we can definitely talk about right now: the Rangers are on a Western swing, not great. Losses to
Do the
Anaheim
ombudsman
and
report
oh
first.
yeah, that's
Because
right.
again,
Sorry,
you're
forgot
stopping
about.
all over that, you asshole.
Well, here's the thing. I've mentioned this before, and this is going to be in the report fucking next week. So, Charlie, I'm fucking watching you. Okay, that's what you need to know. All right.
All right. This week's Ombudsman Report, beginning with episode 67. This was declared the Boo Nieves episode rather than the Benoit Pouliot episode. Nieves played in only 76 games for the Rangers across 4 seasons between 2016 and 2020, which was his only NHL action. Although only one of Pouliot's 12 NHL seasons was spent with the Rangers, he played an 80 regular season and 25 postseason games during the 2013-2014 season. Like most Rangers legends, Benoit Pouliot would go on to sign a contract that would be bought out. Fortunately, it was the Edmonton Oilers who had the pleasure of buying out Pouliot 3 years into a 5-year deal. His NHL career lasted only one more season in Buffalo, meaning that he wasn't even in the NHL in what would have been the final season of that 5-year deal. As you can see from the contract that was offered by the Oilers GM and Rangers legend Craig McTavish, he's got the info on the contracts there. Buzz Killington. Eric referenced Buzz Killington at the beginning of the episode, a recurring bit within Family Guy. Like Family Guy, we'll drop in a gratuitous cutscene here. You can enjoy that when you read the Ombudsman Report. Individual games. Eric and Joe said that based on the overall tone and direction of the season, we don't have to talk about individual games. On Wednesday night, the Rangers somehow drilled right through rock bottom by going down 6-0 to the Ottawa Senators midway through the second period before storming back, to lose 8-4, a final scoreline that somehow doesn't do justice to how poorly the Rangers played. Vincent Trocheck stick throwing. During the January 8 loss to the Buffalo Sabres, Vincent Trocheck grabbed Josh Norris's stick and threw it into the corner, while the Sabres went on the attack at the other end of the ice. Trocheck being badly out of position and getting back to the bench late for a line change allowed the Sabres to score, and Trocheck was subsequently given an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty. Unlike Jacob Trouba's helmet throw 2 years ago, which propelled a middling Rangers team back into a playoff spot, absolutely nothing positive has come out of Trocheck's stick throw. Kraken loss. After the loss to the Seattle Kraken, JT Miller reportedly said, quote, "I don't know. I'm sorry," when Vince Mercogliano asked him what changed after the first period, when the Rangers somehow got out to a 2-0 lead. The Rangers, of course, went on to blow that 2-0 lead and lose 4-2. Some JT Miller history. When discussing JT Miller's career path, Joe said that he was, quote, "a petulant little bitch in New York who was then shipped out to Tampa Bay before being sent
Didn't
by
say
them."
that shit. You said that shit. Charlie, here's my ombudsman report. Eric said that shit. Listen to this stuff. It's literally on video and audio. And by the way,
I am
the
reading the
audience
ombudsman
sees
report.
your smile, you piece of shit that's watching on YouTube. So you know I'm right.
I don't know that you're right.
You done fucked up, Charlie. Okay?
I live by the gospel that is the ombudsman report.
Well, he's wrong.
I don't know. Can't tell you. He's the guy who determines who's right and wrong. He can't be wrong. He's infallible.
Obviously he can't be trusted with that information because actual evidence on video and audio will prove that he's incorrect. And I see your smile, and now the audience does too. Just yeah, by all means.
May I continue?
It's fucking on site, Charlie.
May I continue? May I continue? Well, Miller's trade last season back to the Rangers was in part due to a falling out with star teammate Elias Pettersson, the center, not the defenseman. His 2 previous trades were hockey/cap related decisions rather than mostly the result of his character or attitude in the dressing room. In 2018, Miller was traded to the Tampa Bay Lightning as part of a package with Ryan McDonough because the Rangers didn't see him as worth extending after the first letter went out. The Lightning then traded Miller to Vancouver the next summer because they wanted to save their cap space for Braden Point, which was probably the right move. JT Miller trade. Joe was adamant that he would press the button and undo the JT Miller trade. This question was discussed on the November 27, the Scott Morrow episode of Bandwidth. The discussion begins at the 57-minute mark when Joe says, quote, "I'd absolutely hit the button and undo it so that the Rangers could have the cap space instead." Eric cops out and asks the listeners for their opinion. Is Bill Guerin an idiot? Big Blue Shirt 69 brought up the plus minus to compare JT Miller and Vincent Trocheck, who have been selected for Team USA, to Jason Robertson and Alex DeBrincat, who have not been selected. Using JFresh's advanced metrics, we can see that Robertson and DeBrincat are much better players, and it is inexcusable to select Trocheck and an injured Miller over them. Marchand not suspended. On December 30, Brad Marchand was given a 2-minute minor roughing penalty in overtime for a controversial hit to the head of Montreal Canadiens defenseman Mike Matheson. Marchand was not suspended, possibly because the league didn't want to take one of the Florida Panthers star players out of the Winter Classic. Devils goaltending. I really enjoyed this one. Martin Brodeur was tapped to fix the New Jersey Devils goaltending before this season, and Jacob Markstrom has since imploded. Per Evolving Hockey's WAR metric, he was the 8th best goalie in the 2023-24 season and the 32nd best goalie in the 2024-25 season. While not otherworldly, he was solidly above replacement level and a competent NHL starter at the very least. This year, he has plummeted to being the 8th worst goalie in hockey, being more than a full win below replacement level. Also of note, Canada is possibly going to start the worst goalie in hockey in the 2026 Milan Olympics. All that being said, Jacob Markstrom is a 36-year-old with a career 907 save percentage. It isn't shocking for a middling goalie who's that old to regress the way Markstrom has this season. The Rangers' futility. Eric ponders, are the Rangers one of those sad sack franchises that bad things happen to? Yes. Ombudsman report. Joe said that we would have some fun with the Ombudsman report prior to diving into the Rangers. This report is not supposed to be fun. This is mandatory hockey knowledge and Rangers lore. And finally, Eric's drinking problem. Throughout the episode, Eric mentioned the, quote, "A man may take to drink because he feels himself to be a failure and then fail all the more completely because he drinks," quote, from George Orwell. This quote is actually a great description of Eric's life. And there we have the Ombudsman report, which I will note takes plenty of shots at me. So it's not as if he is like trying to just kid glove me and go after you.
He is wrong, though, about what was said and who said it.
I don't remember this at all.
Well, why don't you just click on a link and go back? You know,
not.
I could see by the look on your beady little eyes that you know.
No.
Well, here's the deal, Charlie. If I'm wrong about this, put it in the report next week. And if I'm right about this, put it in the fucking report next week because you're wrong. Write a report about yourself. All right. Anyway, New York Rangers. So I went to the Ottawa Senators game. What a disaster that was. I sat in the seats right on the glass.
Did they distribute like complimentary butter knives so you could try to slash your wrists in between periods?
No, they don't. I don't. Actually, you can get utensils, or at least where I was. So the body language is terrible from everybody. Nobody's happy. Everything is bad. This was before the letter. So in a really weird way, the Rangers' play in general has improved post-letter, which I find interesting. They're playing looser.
I find it kind of obvious, I think.
I'm not saying it's not obvious. I find it interesting.
No, I don't. I mean, maybe obvious is the wrong word. I think the fact that they are playing better is obvious, but I guess I'm not surprised.
I'm not surprised either.
Playing better.
I just find it interesting. It's just
okay. Then why do you find it interesting?
Because the players that I think are kind of taking this massive step forward are probably the players that are getting off the ship in the first place. So, like, Panarin looks like he has the weight of the world is off his shoulders. I think Trocheck looks like he's just having fun. JT Miller seemed fine the past couple of games. He did not look good against Ottawa from, like, a body language perspective. And we have reason to believe he's completely staying. We'll talk about that in a minute. We did an emergency podcast, an emergency bandwidth about the letter, probably what, 30 or 40 minutes after it was released, maybe an hour. Eric, we've had about a week to think about this. Do you have any other comments about the letter now that we have a little bit more space between us and it?
Not really. I think, look, to your point, it is, you're right, I think, about the players who seem to have the weight of the world off their shoulders, which I guess to me is less interesting because it's just not surprising. I really is kind of expected to me that, the pressure that I think was on those players and on this team until it was announced as like, we're going in a different direction and we are going to start blowing some things up and truly blowing things up, not just in the way that they were doing it last season. And I don't want to relitigate that either, but I guess I'm just not all that surprised by it. So it's maybe a little less interesting to me than it is to you. But I don't know that I have any other deeper insights on the whole thing other than the point that there's a point that some people have been making that I think has some value to it, which is how much do you trust the Rangers to get this right? This is not just purely a Chris Drury question. This is a looking back at the history of the Rangers and all the things that we've been discussing on this show forever. The fact that they don't draft particularly well, that they don't develop their own players particularly well. They are going to kind of have to do that if they are going to be successful with what they are now engaging in, right? Yes, I agree with that. And there's reason to be skeptical that the Rangers are going to be successful because they have not had a good track record and all of that. But the question is compared to what? What's the alternative? You kind of have to start trying to get it right there. And I got to think that they recognize the problems that they have had there. You look at the roster and you do not see any major players who have come up through the system. Even your first overall pick is a disappointment. You got to have some recognition that you're not doing something right there. Now, will they fix it? Will they get it right this time? I do not know. I do not know what the future holds there. But I think that it is an important point to make that they may not get it right. But what was the alternative? The alternative was just keeping on what path that they were on with this roster as it was constructed. No, that was definitely not going anywhere. So it was the right decision. Will it work out for them? That's the big question. I am just kind of glad I sent the letter to a friend of mine who is a baseball fan, big Chicago Cubs fan. And he said, like, I would lose my mind if my team released a statement like this ahead of doing that kind of business. Like, I prefer them to operate, in the background a lot more. And I guess where I am, and I think this is where I was on Friday, I'm relieved. I could not be more relieved to have had that letter come out because, as we noted, this season has just been absolute misery and things did need to change. So I don't know that I have anything more than that. And I think I'm largely still where I was on Friday, less than an hour after it was dropped.
Let's get a question in here because there's a question about this. Remember, you too can ask questions, blueshirtbanter.com at either tier level, the community tier or the premium tier. Ye old scribe, on a scale of 1, not very sick of it at all, to how much Joe is sick of my scales, how sick are you of the letters Drury writes to the fans? My take, if you're doing your job as a general manager, you shouldn't really give a damn what the fans think, only what your boss thinks. One thing off the bat, this is the first letter Drury has actually written to the fans. The other letter came from Jeff Gordon. I also think the last sentence or the last piece of the sentence here, only what your boss thinks, this is twofold, and you were kind of touching on this, Eric. I do think it was getting to a point of critical mass where the New York Rangers needed to say something. And by the New York Rangers, I mean Chris Drury. Like there needed to be a direction. I don't think that the Rangers harmed their leverage by announcing that they were basically for sale. If anything, I think it actually increases their leverage because as of right now, with how weak the East is and the West is pretty competitive, there's not a ton of confirmed sellers out there. Vancouver already pretty much sold the only two pieces they have that anyone is interested in. So it's really the Rangers that are out there right now. And the closer you get to the deadline, the more teams will emerge that will be sellers. Regardless of who emerges as sellers, the Rangers have two of the biggest chips, maybe three of the biggest chips, to be honest with you. Trocheck being the biggest because there's not enough trade protection to protect him from going to basically half the league. Artemi Panarin, who's a lesser chip because of the fact that, he has no movement clause and can pretty much choose where he wants to go. We're of the opinion that there are maybe two places that he's going to go, which is Florida and Colorado. Although, maybe he wants to go somewhere else. Maybe he likes the idea of San Jose. Reports came out today about whether or not, the type of contract that Panarin is looking for, which is part of the reason why he's not going to be on the Rangers moving forward. Maybe Panarin says to Drury, let my agent negotiate with a series of teams and see who would be willing to give me a contract in, the realm of what I want. And I'll accept a trade to that team. And the Rangers can do a sign and trade. So but it doesn't hurt the Rangers to do a letter. I think it would have been nice if Chris Drury answered some questions. We talked last week about how that probably would have been a disaster because Chris Drury just isn't charismatic enough, quite frankly, to do that. This signals where the Rangers are. It makes it extremely clear that moving forward, losses like the losses you've seen the past couple of games to Anaheim and Los Angeles are actually good things for the organization because they're trying to get as high of a draft pick as they can. And they're going to try to get younger talent. I would actually lose my mind if we got to the Olympics and the Rangers were this bad and didn't make some type of a directional statement. Doesn't need to be a letter, but it could be, an interview with Drury and Vince or Molly just saying like, hey, obviously we're not happy with where we are. We're going to have to make some directional changes. You know what I mean? But they couldn't leave things the way that they were. This letter
I agree.
was for Dolan as much as the fans, in my opinion.
Sure. I think that's fair. Real quick on the San Jose thing. Right now, the first line of the San Jose Sharks is Macklin Celebrini at center, Will Smith at right wing, and Colin Graff at left wing. Just imagine yourself.
You will not say a bad word about Colin Graff, Quinnipiac grad. Not a word. Not a word.
I nothing
Not a
him.
word. Not a bad word.
I'm not saying anything bad. I nothing him. I don't even know really who he is, which is kind of my point. Imagine a Macklin Celebrini, Will Smith, Artemi Panarin first line for the Sharks. Like, man, I might stay up to watch Sharks games if that's the first line that they're going to be throwing out there. But I agree with you. I mean, to some extent, this is for Dolan. Well, I think like we already knew that Dolan had pretty much full confidence in Chris Drury. Dolan has his guys and he likes his guys, and Drury is one of his guys, for better or for worse. I'm not saying it's not at all for Dolan. I agree with you that, look, as somebody who used to do crisis comms and public relations, there are a couple different ways that you could go about doing something like this if you wanted to. I understand entirely from the perspective of the management of the Rangers or from the perspective of Chris Drury, not wanting to do a press conference about this and have questions being shouted at you from a whole bunch of different reporters. Releasing the letter is certainly the most controlled way of getting this message out there that he wants to be out there. The problem with that, though, is that it does, I think there are questions that I think, as you noted, you probably would be better if he answered, and they're not necessarily answered in that letter. You can do the one-on-one interview, though. You could sit down with Vince or Molly or somebody like that, and you can do that interview. And those questions, most of those questions will be asked, but it is not in the chaotic environment that a press conference would be if he had called a press conference to do that. So I understand why they went the route that they went. I think it probably would have been better if he would have done a one-on-one interview. But as we also know, all these GMs have a big fucking group text. So the fact that the Rangers were going to be open for business wasn't going to be a secret to the people who needed to know it anyway. So announcing it to the fans and the public in a letter like this doesn't really change the fundamental dynamics because like people kind of would have known it already. He would have been making calls. And if he was making calls to different teams about, what would you give me for this for Panarin? What would you give me for Trocheck? What would you give me for Carson Soucy? What would you give me for Braden Schneider? That was going to get around to be public anyway. And if the way that these guys communicate with each other is to just throw this stuff into a giant group text, or I guess it's actually a chain email, then it was going to be public knowledge for the GMs of other teams anyway. This was a message for us. It was a message for fans of the team to let them know, again, the direction that they were going. And probably it some intention there to invoke the last time that they did this on purpose. Because the last time that they did this, it really was only a couple seasons later that this team is competitive again, that it's interesting again. So I think they're purposefully trying to invoke the feelings that people had about the aftermath of the letter the last time. Now, the big problem is, as we noted, there is no Artemi Panarin to sign in the offseason. There is no way of short-circuiting this retool, rebuild. And I think we'll get into a little bit about like what are the differences between those things because in that letter, this is one of the things we really didn't harp all that much on in the immediate reaction podcast we did was they were very specific about this being a retool and not a rebuild. The only way that you could match the effect of the Panarin free agent signing now would be in the offseason to trade for Jason Robertson. That really is the only way that you're going to be able to do that. Because as we have discussed ad nauseum, there are no free agents coming. Right now, the most premier, unless he signs an extension as part of one of these trades, as you were just suggesting, the only premier free agent that's going to be on the market is Artemi Panarin himself. And we know that they're not going back down that route again. So I understand the communication strategy behind the letter. I think it would have been better. And I still think it would be good for Chris Drury to sit down with one of the beat reporters and do an interview if he doesn't want to do a press conference. And again, I understand entirely why he doesn't want to do a press conference. I think it would be good for him to do an interview like that. But yeah, I think the letter to me, a lot of it was still trying to evoke the feelings and sentiments that people had from several years ago, because that worked out pretty well for the team. And I think they want to draw on those memories to try to suggest to fans that like, well, that could happen again.
So Tom29 asks, or says, I guess, writing a letter and posting it on social media is kind of a weak move. As Wendy Puck said on one of the threads, hold a press conference. When was the last time Drury addressed the media and took questions? Is it common for other GMs on other teams to talk with the media? So to the last part of your question, it depends on the team. Some general managers
And the person.
like Tom Fitzgerald of the Devils was happy to have even though they're not that much ahead of the Rangers in the standings, like, yeah, we're going to go for it. We're going to fix this. Cool. We talked to the media. Here's something I will say, and this is not a defense of Chris Drury, although it's going to come off this way. I think it's better that Chris Drury did not do a press conference simply because what I think he's trying to invoke here is a sense of a feeding frenzy in a way where, hey, we're open for business. We're going to do a lot of selling. You're not going to be able to get Panarin unless you're one of the teams manicured on his list. But like Vincent Trocheck, Braden Schneider, maybe Alexis Lafreniere, like we're listening to everybody basically. And you get teams to reach out and be like, hey, what would you like? Then it's like, oh, the San Jose's interested in Lafreniere. You know what I mean? You go down that road. I think part of the feeding frenzy-esque atmosphere is by being as vague as possible. And if he sits down with a Molly is going to ask follow-up questions like, well, do you think you're going to trade Vincent Trocheck? Do you think and he doesn't have the answers to those questions right now.
Well, he just has evasions of those questions.
Sure. Better for him to not have to even have the questions thrown at him. You know what I mean? He will have to answer for this one way or another at some point. He will
post-trade deadline interview. I think that would be something reasonable to do.
I don't think the Rangers gain or lose anything by Chris Drury not doing a press conference. I'd kind of prefer him not do one, to be honest with you. It makes things a hell of a lot easier to just sit here and be like, well, he said what he said. Let's see and you're right. The other general managers in the league they absolutely know what's going on. But the other point that you made that I definitely want to point out is if we want to talk about what the difference is between a retool and a rebuild, I think this letter is worded the way that it is for a variety of reasons, right? To make it seem like, things are fine. Don't worry about it. Like we're gonna figure this out quicker than maybe, it seems. The truth of the matter is the only way that this is a true retool and not a rebuild is if the Rangers manage to get their hands on Jason Robertson. And I think that there is a divorce coming between Jason Robertson and the Dallas Stars. He just changed his agent. Certainly seems like the rumblings that are going on out there is that they don't think he's worth the amount of money they want to sign him to. The Rangers could absolutely afford signing him to whatever he wants to be signed to. And that is the type of young, skilled player that actually changes the game a little bit. I would tell you that he is even a better option in this regard than Brady Tkachuk. I just it's two different players. Not saying I wouldn't love to have Brady on my team. I absolutely would. I think Jason Robertson is a better player. So unless that happens, this is a much longer timeline from a retooling perspective. And I'm doing the air quotes for those of you who are watching on YouTube. So for me, the most important part of this that's going to be a tell. Panarin's not really a tell because Drury's kind of going to have to take whatever return he can get. But the impending Vincent Trocheck trade that better be happening is going to answer a lot of questions about what Chris Drury thinks of this current timeline. If he's getting a lot of draft picks and prospects who are newer, meaning they were drafted last year, that's going to tell you one thing. I don't think that's necessarily going to be what's happening, just to be honest. But I do think that part of the reason that, and I speculated this on the emergency bandwidth, that the letter was released when it was released was because I think we may see trades before the trade deadline. And I think it would actually behoove the Rangers enormous. I meant before the Olympics. And I think it would behoove the Rangers enormously to trade some of these players before the Olympics. Because if the United States does not have a good showing and Vincent Trocheck looks like shit on the Olympic team, that may harm his trade value. So these are things that Drury is going to have to think about. And if he can drum up interest from other teams to start a bidding war, I mean, I think it's also worth saying there's a bunch of reports out there that the Rangers don't want to trade Vincent Trocheck, but they're looking at all options. I have no idea what conversations are happening behind closed doors. It's become readily apparent that Chris Drury has been much more communicative with this team this year than he was last year. He's talked to Panarin, told him he's not being signed, talked to all the players, let them know that this was coming before he dropped the letter, doing things that, quite frankly, he probably should have done last year. But nobody can complain about not being in the loop anymore. And again, to me, I think the culling has to be pretty deep. I think the Rangers need to potentially even take some healthy tissue with them here to really redo this. So again, him not releasing, doing a press conference doesn't mean anything to me. If he does what he's supposed to do with these trades and time will tell, who gives a shit how he communicated this to the public?
Yeah, I think that's all fair and reasonable. I think the only other expediting of this, and it's you can't even quite say it like that, is if they bottom out now, if they get one of the very good players who we believe is going to be available in this upcoming draft, maybe they draft fairly highly after next season too, because I think you and I would agree we're not really expecting them to be a very competitive team next year. Then that takes us to the point, does it not, when we're talking about Austin Matthews' contract is
Yeah.
coming up and
Connor
Connor
McDavid.
McDavid's contract is coming up. And yes, they're 2 years older, but those are still superstar players. And it's almost like you do what they did with Panarin and Kako and Lafreniere. Take again everything that we know now and feel now about Kako and Lafreniere off the table for a moment, but you have the immediate signing of Artemi Panarin and then adding a second overall draft pick and a first overall draft pick. You run the same thing essentially, but in reverse, where you have a couple years of high draft picks, and then you add that big guy in free agency. And that probably jumps up the timeline a little bit, but largely tracks with the total amount of time that the Rangers were quote unquote in the wilderness after the last letter. The problem is that you just, as we know and as we have discussed endlessly, you can't count on that. The only thing that would possibly make sense for them too is to try to be in on an Austin Matthews trade if when that is something that Toronto decides that they are going to do if they truly believe that they're not going to be able to extend Austin Matthews, or perhaps even more insane, think they shouldn't extend Austin Matthews. But that's the only way that you're going to get that free agent like Panarin the first time around after the first letter that is going to help expedite that. Otherwise, you're right. Jason Robertson is the only other option that exists out there for advancing the timeline. I guess this is always part of this is the question I wanted to ask you is how do you define the difference, right? Between a rebuild and a retool in the way that they were trying to make a difference in the letter that they released. Other than I can give you an answer for that that's just kind of PR spin, because if you say that it's a rebuild, you're telling fans, I don't know what, 4, 5 seasons before they're potentially thinking about the playoffs again, if not more.
That's the answer. That's the whole answer right there.
It's just a PR thing.
This is just like listen, I think the Rangers really hope they can work their way out of this quicker. But the reason they're saying that it's a retool and not a rebuild and using the language that they did is exactly for that, what you just said. Keep buying tickets. Don't worry. It's going to be fine. Don't look behind the curtain type deal. That is my takeaway from this. Now, there are some questions. Let me actually say one thing before. I think that we've exhausted quite a bit of virtual ink on Artemi Panarin. There's less to talk about with him until more information comes out, just because of him controlling his own destiny. Vincent Trocheck is the next guy that I want to discuss. But before I do that, I was listening to Blueshirts Breakaway. Shout out Blueshirts Breakaway. Shout out Greg Kaplan in this instance, who brought up a really good point about Panarin. I don't know if those of you saw, Panarin made a comment to one of the beat reporters, I think it was Molly, about how he was confused after the letter was released. And, he wants to be here, but he's not part of the plans and he's confused. You can only pick one priority. You either want as much money as you can get, which it appears Artemi Panarin does, and that's fine, or you can prioritize being a New York Ranger. And which of the two levers you pull has a consequence for the other lever, the other door. You ever play Fallout? Yeah, you got to play Fallout. Are you even a video game guy?
Not really.
Let's see. This is why we're not friends. Anyway, in Fallout 4, there's like this huge puzzle that you have to go through. And at the end, there's like 2 containers, basically, and you have to pick one of them. The one that you don't pick explodes. That's literally what we're talking about here. Artemi Panarin has a choice. He has made said choice. His choice is that he wants as much money as possible. I do not blame him for making that choice. He is a mid-30s NHL hockey player who can likely get an 8-year deal if the Rangers are interested in doing a sign and trade for him, and why wouldn't they be? At the very least, he's getting a 7-year deal on the open market. Why shouldn't he make as much money as he can with this final contract of his NHL career? But if that is the decision you're making, don't tell me you're confused about why you're not part of the Rangers' plans. You don't get to do both. You cannot have your cake and eat it too. And I hate that analogy, because why would you want cake if you can't eat it? So, if you want to be a New York Ranger, I'll give you a spoiler for those of you who are in the premium tier. I have back-to-back Joe's Reaction of the Weeks this week and next week. This week is going to be tiers of who's going to be traded or not. Next week is going to be what are they going to be traded for. Panarin is in his own tier, which is 99.9999% being traded.
Repeating,
and the
of course.
0.001% is Panarin says to Chris Drury, I'll take a 3-year, $30 million deal. And I think Chris Drury signs him to that today, if that's what Artemi Panarin wants. But that's not what Artemi Panarin wants. Artemi Panarin wants a deal that is going to take him into his 40s. And the Rangers would be wise to not do that. Now, I also understand the trepidation from some of you that are like, Artemi Panarin is a walking 80 to 90 to 100 point player. He is the best player on the New York Rangers by a mile. He makes everyone around them better. What is the plan if the Rangers move on from Artemi Panarin? To which my answer is they're going to suck. That's kind of the point. And I get it that that's fine for this year and potentially for next year. But the Rangers are not in a contention window where if you think the Rangers are getting back in the playoffs and going to be competitive in the next 3 years, I think that is optimistic but realistic. That would put Panarin in his late 30s. And I'm not suggesting he can't be worth that money in that contract. But I also don't think it's a bad move for Chris Drury to be like, this is a good time for us to get out of the Panarin business. We'll get what we can. We don't want to sign him to that type of contract, and let's just kind of reset a little bit here. Again, if Panarin wants to come back to the Rangers for a $10 million deal over the course of 3 or 4 years, he'd be a Ranger right now. I think Chris Drury would sign him right now. But he doesn't. That's his prerogative. But don't tell me you're confused. You're not confused. You know what's going on. You made this decision. Two-way street.
Yeah. I think the length of the contract is a bigger deal than the money part of the contract. And it's completely reasonable to not want to be tied up with Artemi Panarin for 6, 7, 8 years from now, even at a reasonable AAV, because you do have to keep some options open for yourself. And while we have had, of course, plenty of discussions, and I have said repeatedly, free agency is dead until I see somebody actually make it to free agency. You do kind of got to hold a little bit back on the possibility that the Matthews and the McDavids of the world in 2 years when those contracts up are not re-upping where they are, or that the only way that those kinds of players change hands anymore is via trade. And you're the team that trades for that player and then signs that player. You have to have the cap space open to make that possible. So that makes total sense to me. I think you're absolutely right, and Greg is absolutely right that Panarin can pick one of the two, and it's fine what he's picked. Look, like I am going to have nothing but great memories of Artemi Panarin as a New York Ranger. He is one of, if not the best free agent signing that the New York Rangers have ever had. He is, I looked it up here.
One of the best free agent signings in NHL history, you would think.
Yeah. Truthfully, yes. And also for a guy who was an undrafted free agent when he came to Chicago in the first place, right? Like just an absolute bonkers story. A guy who has averaged 104 points a season in his NHL career. I mean, just an absolute crazy great player. But he's made his choice, and that's fine. And actually, it probably is the right choice for the Rangers themselves and saving them from. While I do agree with the people who have said that Panarin is the kind of player who ages fairly gracefully, like I think he's going to continue to be a pretty productive player for a number of years more. Wanting to get younger, wanting to get that money invested in younger talent makes complete sense. So I also don't, I think the last thing I'll add to that too is you're right that, and we have all been right in the way that we've been talking about it, that the return from Panarin is going to be tamped down some by his no movement clause. But we were talking about this in the Slack, and the leverage that the Rangers have in that circumstance is, and you know, it is a bit of a dangerous game to play. But if you're Florida, if you're Colorado, you want to win a championship. Florida may even be the more desperate one in this circumstance because of how their season has been going and because of they've been needing to subsist without Matthew Tkachuk, who just got back, and they're still without Barkov, who they don't know when they're going to get back. You can say to them, it's like, look, I understand you really want this guy, but if you're not going to offer us something of value for him, we don't have to trade him at all. We can just run out the clock on him. And yeah, he's going to walk away for nothing. But the loss to you is this season. The loss to you is the opportunity to three-peat. The loss to you is not bringing in the best available guy who is the most talented player available at the trade deadline. A guy like Artemi Panarin, who is typically not available for trades, particularly trades in the manner that I think we're going to see. it is not the highest leverage position, but it's also not nothing. So I think we very well may see a not as big of a return as if he didn't have a no movement clause, of course. But I don't maybe it's not going to be quite as like, ugh, this is not Patrick Kane, like really this is it. That's all you're getting for him kind of return. I think you're gonna get value for Artemi Panarin when and
So
if he's moved, and I think it's when.
let's talk about the other guy that's really the big name here. It's Vincent Trocheck. A ton of you wrote in about him. So I'm just going to name you. Igorovich had a question about what are the chances that the Rangers trade him before the Olympics. Nicole Vitale asked a question about him, saying, how seriously Drury takes this retool is whether or not he's willing to part ways with Trocheck. Kyle Schnitzler asks, is there any way that the Rangers trade Trocheck again before the Olympic break? And then I believe it was Tom 29. No, never mind. I already read his question. Anyway, here's the deal. We've talked at length about the fact that Vincent Trocheck simply has to be traded, that the Rangers cannot pass this opportunity. It just does not make sense. The thing that I wanted to kind of pick your brain on, Eric, and we were talking about this a little bit before the show, there is a reason there's an argument to be made that the Rangers might say, hey, we can wait until the summer, have every team be interested, and it's still not a rental. Vincent Trocheck is still signed for 2 years after this year, and, let's see what happens. The problem I have with this is Vincent Trocheck does have a limited no-trade list, and right now, coming into this season, you would think he was unaware of the fact that this was going to happen. I don't necessarily want him adjusting his no-trade list, which I believe has to be done January 1st. Knowing the information he knows, akin to exactly what July 1st, sorry. Akin to exactly what Jacob Trouba did when he found out that he was probably going to be traded to the Detroit Red Wings. So, all of that aside, I think the most value you're going to get back for Vincent Trocheck is going to be to a team that gets him for 3 playoff runs. We have already heard that Minnesota is seriously interested in him.
Before you get Ombudsman reported, I'm going to correct one thing for you, which is Vincent Trocheck is signed through the 2028-29 season. So you would get not only this year, but 3 more seasons after this with him.
Why did I think it was 3 playoff seasons?
I'm looking at Puckpedia right now, 25-26 season, and he is signed through 26-27, 27-28, and 28-29. He's a UFA again in before the 2029-2030 season.
Wow, you're right, actually. So you get 4 playoff runs with Vincent Trocheck. There's a ton of value
with the cap going up the way it is. Yeah.
That's going to be a great, great contract for somebody. You should trade for him right now, Bill Guerin. Prove to us that you're not an idiot. And trade for Vincent Trocheck. But this is part of is Chris Drury serious about this or not? And it's why I've made the comment that, I'm off the Chris Drury boat if he does not trade Vincent Trocheck, because it would be a dereliction of duty.
By when?
I'm sorry?
By when?
This year.
So could it go into the summer? Could it go into the deadline of when he has to submit his no-trade list?
So I personally believe you're going to get more value for Vincent Trocheck before the Olympics or right before the trade deadline. The only way to answer that question is to get to the other side of the Olympics and see how Vincent Trocheck performs in the Olympics. It is possible that Chris Drury can extract equal value this summer at the draft for Vincent Trocheck, and that would not require a renewal of his no-trade list, which would happen July 1st. So it's possible that working within the constraints that Chris Drury has right now, he could do that. I just believe that any team acquiring Vincent Trocheck today would be better served to use him for the 4 playoff runs so that I don't get charlied. And it would be more beneficial for the Rangers to get out of the business as soon as possible. And listen, Trocheck is not a disaster. I do think Trocheck is a major part of what went wrong last year. I do think Trocheck has not been part of the solution this year, and I have made my ire of those two things very well known. But even if he was a model citizen for the New York Rangers, it would be absolutely insanity for the Rangers to not take what would be ultimately maybe one of the biggest sold, if not the biggest sold pieces at the deadline this year and recoup value while they're going through a rebuild
Yeah.
slash retool.
Yeah.
And if you want to know the difference, and we've talked about this, Eric, and it's to a question that Nicole Vitale is asking, which is basically, you know, if Drury's taking the retool seriously, she's absolutely right. There's the difference between a rebuild and a retool from the things the Rangers control is trading Vincent Trocheck. For the things the Rangers don't necessarily control, it's Jason Robertson. And if you happen to do both of those things, not in the same deal, obviously, although it could be, I guess, it truly does put the Rangers in a much better position. Now, the other question, because again, I think we've spilled plenty of ink on Vincent Trocheck. It does seem that Braden Schneider is going to have some interest around the NHL if this is a guy that the Rangers are going to move on from. And Schneider is an interesting case. He's playing top line minutes right now because Adam Fox is injured. 24 years old, restricted free agent at the end of this season, due for an enormous raise. But if a team talks themselves into the fact that he is a 24-year-old top pair right-handed defenseman, is it possible, and Chip asks this in his question, that the return, actually, let's just read it. So Chip says, who brings back a greater return, Panarin or Schneider? Seems like it should be a no-brainer, but between stupid general managers and Panarin's no movement clause, is it closer than people think? I think if both are traded, Schneider would actually bring back a bigger return. Because general managers, and this is where the Rangers being a complete mess the past 2 years actually helps them, can easily look at this and be like, well, if I put this guy on a competent team, he's going to play really well.
They can
and
imagine.
I can fix him. And he's young. And we're about to have that conversation with Alexis Lafreniere too. But I think it helps the Rangers in this case. What are your thoughts? I totally think Schneider gets a better return than Panarin if he gets traded. And I think he will be traded.
I'm not quite as certain as you are, but I think that people would be surprised by especially those who are down on Braden Schneider, and understandably so. The point you're making is absolutely correct that Braden Schneider at his age, at his profile as a defenseman, allows a lot of GMs to imagine what he could be on their team in a way that not every other player can be imagined in the same way. And we're going to get to this with Alexis Lafreniere. There's almost like there's a bit too much data on Alexis Lafreniere for teams to do that much imagining, especially vis-a-vis his first overall draft selection, that the shine has completely come off of that one. I agree with you that people can imagine about Braden Schneider. So I think the return for Braden Schneider would be fairly considerable. And again, he's another guy that has been linked to the San Jose Sharks. And understandably so, not just because there's a trading relationship that exists there, obviously, between Chris Drury and Mike Grier in San Jose. So that would seem to make some sense to me. Real quick on the Trocheck stuff, the only way that the Trocheck and Robertson being involved in the same transaction for each other would happen would be after the season, because Dallas is not going to move Robertson this year because they are trying to win a Stanley Cup too. And they are at least, I think, smart enough to understand they have a better chance of it with Jason Robertson on the team this year. The problem there, and this is really why this is to the advantage of the Rangers in this case, and really to other teams in the league, is they want to move on from Robertson because they don't want to pay him.
Right.
I think that's ridiculous.
Insane. It's
and
insane.
Absolutely stupid. But the fact that it is that reason opens a lot more doors. But it would have to be after the season and before the draft if they were going to be involved in the same transaction for each other. I agree with you.
I don't think they would be, by the way.
Although
maybe if it's a money thing, Dallas may talk
Possibly.
themselves in, not to cut you off, but Dallas may talk themselves into, hey, we can replace most of the production. Again, the most is doing a lot of work there. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, you're seeing my fucking, rabbit ears there. But and at half the price of what he's going to cost. Now, you and I, intelligent human beings, understand that the value that you're giving to keep a guy like Robertson, who I believe is 24 years old, far outweighs what you would be getting with Vincent Trocheck. But by all means, Dallas, do whatever you want. Trocheck's amazing. He's an Olympian. Robertson's not. So what does that tell you? Got to trade
Yeah.
for him. Do it right now.
Yeah. No, he's Robertson is 26.
26. Thank you for
So,
keeping me from getting Charlied.
but still, that's a young player with a lot of NHL years in front of him there, and probably some really good production as well. I am less worried about the Olympics part of this. Like, where is Trocheck playing in that lineup? Fourth line?
Yeah, he's a glue guy. But
Yeah.
if the team underperforms, look at the reaction to Adam Fox
But
from a
see,
single shift against Canada that he had really nothing to do with.
Well, okay, so again, people are stupid, and we have done the breakdown, and Charlie is included in the ombudsman report before. But I actually do agree that I don't think it was the single shift that's the reason that Bill Guerin didn't include Adam Fox on that team. I think it's for a bunch of other related stupid reasons nonetheless. But I don't think it was just that one individual shift. I I think the team is very likely to underperform. I just don't think that a fourth line center is going to bear all the brunt of that if and when it happens. In the same way that, the United States was an overtime goal away from winning the Four Nations faceoff. And while, again, people have misidentified the role that Austin Matthews played in that goal that Connor McDavid scored, Fox in that singular moment was noticeable, and it was the difference between winning and losing. The odds that there's going to be a similar circumstance in the Olympics, and that it's going to be Vincent Trocheck who's going to be the guy who is going to be more readily identifiable as responsible in all of that, just because of the difference in position, seems to be a major difference in kind. The fact that Adam Fox is getting blamed for that goal, I think, has a lot to do with the fact that he is a defenseman, and they're expecting him to defend, and he did not, even though, of course, other players on the ice in the defensive zone are there to defend as well, even if defense isn't in the name of the position that you play. I just don't think that those same kinds of circumstances are going to line up. I'm not saying that he's going to come away from the Olympics and everybody's going to be going, wow, just Vincent Trocheck, absolutely impressed at the Olympics. He was really great. And, if they were only a full team of Vincent Trochecks, they would have won the gold medal. I don't think that that's going to be the case. I just don't think the likely stink that is going to be on Team USA after these Olympics is going to fall as disproportionately on Vincent Trocheck as it did wrongly on Adam Fox. And maybe I am a fool here, but I am at least cautiously optimistic that if they do underperform, given the conversations that were had about, not having Cole Caulfield on the team, not having Lane Hudson on the team, not having Jason Robertson on the team, that the brunt is going to be borne by Bill Guerin, which is where the blame should be if Team USA underperforms. So I'm just less concerned about the pre-Olympic, post-Olympic Trocheck part of it. I don't think it changes all that much.
Can I clarify to a point
Sure.
my original comment? Because I don't
I'll
really
allow it.
disagree with anything that you said. Would you, if I made the argument to you that Trocheck would get more play out of being a U.S. Olympian selection before the Olympics in the event that the United States team underperforms than he would after? So right now, there is a shine on Vincent Trocheck for being a member of Team USA. If they don't even make it to the medal round, does that shine wipe away from his value?
How much shine is there?
Eric, this is a stupid league. I think there is quite a bit of shine, actually.
If you think that that's the case,
You
then
don't
I
think
don't think
Bill
it's
Guerin?
diminished that much by the team disappointing
Well, and
at
that's
the
listen,
line.
that is a totally valid argument to make, especially if Bill Guerin is the guy who's really going after Vincent Trocheck, right? Which again, he is
Sure.
sniffing
Yeah.
around. So I'll support that. It's just the Rangers do kind of have an opportunity here to. I think they should do as much work as they can before the Olympics, to be honest with you.
I don't disagree with that
Because
at
the
all.
longer the Rangers are bad, the better they're doing. Listen, I put it in my notes today. They're doing a really good job of fucking this shit up before they even sell. Oh, cool. But I just,
Well, in a way, yes, I understand what you're saying, but in a way, they are still losing, but they're not as bad while they're doing it. Like
yeah, they've played
they're
better.
not great, but like they have been playing better hockey. The fundamental question we've been talking about with Trocheck, I just think the difference is marginal. Like if there's a difference there at all, pre-Olympics, post-Olympics, depending on the outcome of the Olympics, I just think the difference there really is marginal. And I think it's not going to change GM's attitudes. Like maybe it's the difference between an included like secondary draft pick in the trade being like a fourth instead of a fifth round pick or something like that. I just don't think it is going to make that significant a difference in what the return for Vincent Trocheck is going to be, given his reputation, given what we know GMs think about him, given the contract he is signed to, given the position that he plays, and given what we all now believe about the demand for him around the league, I just don't think it makes that big of a difference.
All right, final topic before we get out of here. Reports have surfaced that the New York Rangers are potentially more interested in fixing Alexis Lafreniere than trading him. I know I am somewhat biased because he is my son, but I personally understand the logic behind this. Now, I will say, back to the point that I was making to you before about public relations, I don't know what you can trust from the New York Rangers right now, because if I was Chris Drury, I would be throwing up as many smoke signals as possible. Hey, we don't think we're going to trade Alexis Lafreniere. We really think there's a really good player here, and we're going to figure out what we have in him, and we're going to fix it. Makes me signal to the league, if you want Alexis Lafreniere, you need to give me something for Alexis Lafreniere. Same thing with Braden Schneider, where the Rangers are like, we fucking love this guy. We're not trading him for anything. And then they put him on the third pairing, and they don't. Even though opportunities present themselves, they never actually move forward with any of said opportunities, and they just leave him, wallowing away until Adam Fox is injured. So I do think, though, that the Rangers are in a really difficult spot with Alexis Lafreniere, mainly because if they do trade him, you are never getting back the value that you should be getting for a first overall pick. Now, the argument of whether or not the Rangers are selling low or selling high depends on whether or not Alexis Lafreniere decides to give a shit about playing hockey again, which seems to me like that's a pretty big question that I wouldn't need to have asked about me if I was a professional hockey player, but I'm not Alexis Lafreniere. However, if that is the reason that Alexis Lafreniere is not as successful as he was 2 years ago, that is a fixable situation theoretically. And if I'm Chris Drury and I'm looking at what I'm trying to do, which is to get younger, to get faster, and to get more skilled, I've seen Alexis Lafreniere be the best forward on the New York Rangers in a playoff series against the defending and then Stanley Cup champions. I've seen him do it. So is there something in here that is more valuable to me to try to extract from him versus trading him on a 50 cents on the dollar trade? And whether or not you agree with that and whether or not Chris Drury going down that road, I will at least say I see the logic in where he is coming from. Now, what say you?
My problem with that comes back again to who and what I think I now know and believe Alexis Lafreniere to be,
Mm-hmm.
which is just not the kind, we talked about this before, the kind of psychopath that you want who lives, eats, sleeps, breathes the sport like this.
Doesn't eat pasta.
Yeah, like he eats chickpea pasta because he's that much of a psychopath, right? I hear your point about how good he was, and I don't disagree about how good he was against the Florida Panthers in that playoff series. I have said before that I think it is not at all a coincidence that we saw the best hockey we ever saw from Alexis Lafreniere, while the Rangers were playing the best hockey that they have played in the last couple of seasons. First, in that first Eastern Conference final run with the kid line, and then in the second Eastern Conference final run playing with Panarin and Trocheck. I think he is a guy who needs the tide to rise to lift his boat. So the problem with the "we're going to fix Alexis Lafreniere" to me is, unless you can turn him into that kind of guy who is, in the gym constantly, who is really Nathan McKinnon level obsession about. I think this is a distinction that Phil has made, and I'm going to echo him again here. Not just about wanting to win, but about truly hating to lose. That is a harder lift than trying to figure out some technical skill part of his game to refine that and make it like truly premier NHL level. That's something in and of him as a person and in his personality that I don't know that you can be productive, that you can be successful trying to change in that way. So my concern is if he is a guy like that, that needs the tide to rise to lift his boat, there isn't much of a tide that's going to rise in the next couple of seasons. So I think the problem is more likely than not, he looks just as bad, if not worse, in the next couple of years. And then you're having a conversation about selling him for 25 cents on the dollar rather than 50. 50 may just be the high watermark of what you're going to sell and get for Alexis Lafreniere. And I don't know how you answer that question. I'm really glad I am not in the position of having to answer that question for the Rangers. I do not envy Chris Drury in this sense because I think it's more likely than not that he is a perfectly fine middle six, which is a great euphemism for third line, complementary piece on a good hockey team.
He'd be
And
great on the Florida Panthers.
Yeah, the Rangers just aren't going to be that in the next couple of seasons. So I actually think there's a possibility that selling at 50 cents on the dollar on Alexis Lafreniere at this point is selling high. If you weren't going to sell him a couple seasons ago, but there was just no logical reason for them to do that because it was in the wake of that series against the Panthers, the playoffs that year where he was great, and the beginning of that season where he also looked really good. There was just no reason for you to want to trade him then. I think this is the high watermark for selling him. So I would probably move on from him, even though you're going to hate the return in a lot of respects. It might be the other problem with this too is going to be if he goes on to a good team where he's playing a complementary role and he's playing on a line with somebody else that is going to raise his game in that way, he's going to look really great. And we're going to look back at the trade and going, see how stupid Chris Drury was to trade Alexis Lafreniere. I don't know that the results in that case, like you're really going to have to parse them a little bit more about what team he was on, who he was playing with in order to make that determination. So I'm prepared for all of the dumbness that will probably come as a result of that. But I think you move on from him because I just don't have the confidence anymore that he can be that guy. And I would rather get what I can now rather than take much less than that in a couple of years of him playing shitty hockey on a shitty team that only further depresses his value.
Well, what if you can only get 25 cents on the dollar right now? There may not be a 50 cents on the dollar trade out there for him right now. And I do think that and it's impossible to answer these questions without actually knowing what's going on. But if the New York Rangers do not have, or if Chris Drury doesn't have an offer in front of him that you and I would say is a 50 cents on the dollar trade, to me, it makes more sense just to hold on to him. We figured this out in real time last week. The no trade protection doesn't really kick in for a couple of years for Alexis Lafreniere. You can have this conversation down the road if you so needed to. And it very well may be that the Rangers do that. But
And then you're doing what? You're trading him for 10 cents on the dollar?
I mean, again, at that point, if the option is to trade super low right now, super low, or take the risk of seeing if you can't get a somewhat valuable player there, what's the point of selling super low? What are you actually getting
Our
back?
disagreement there is like I don't think that this is super low. Even if, let's say, we stipulate for the point of argument here that it is 25 cents.
I love that we're
dollar.
just saying like random percentages here, like 25 cents on the dollar. Like we
Yeah,
have an idea what that means in the grand scheme of things, but go on. It's fine.
I know, but it's like it approximates something that people can understand. So I think it's perfectly reasonable for point of conversation. So let's stipulate that the best offer that Drury has in front of him is 25 cents on the dollar. And I'm right about my diagnosis of him as a player. It's only going to go down more, almost to the point where maybe he is what some people in the comments are saying he is right now, which I don't think he is right now, which is unmovable at that cap hit.
Oh, I don't think so at all. He's movable. If Alexis Lafreniere peaks at a 55-point player in the new cap era, he's worth the $7.4 million he makes.
But my point is, if the team is bad, he may not be a 55-point player because I just think he is a guy who is so dependent on who he is playing with for his own productivity. And as we have noted at an earlier point in this conversation, he has spent most of the last couple of years on a line with a guy who averages 100 points a season. Like, this goes back to and not as a direct one-to-one comparison, so please nobody think I'm doing that, but Sleeve McDykel is playing on the right wing with Sidney Crosby, and he's putting up 80 points in a season, right? So I don't think he's that guy. I would love to be proven wrong, but I think you run the risk of only further depressing his value by him not having good line mates, of being even worse in terms of production, looking like a guy who doesn't give a shit, and then who wants him?
Sleeve McDykel?
So do you not know what that's a reference to?
Not a clue.
Okay, so there was an old Nintendo baseball game that was Japanese manufactured, obviously, and they needed to come up with player names, like fake player names, because they weren't authorized to use Major League Baseball players. And Sleeve McDykel is one of them. Let me pull up like the full image here because the names are just absolutely glorious. Sleeve McDykel, Anson Sweeney, Daryl Archideld, Willie Dustis, Jeremy Gride, Sean Furcott. Like, the names are just hilarious. It really
Sleeve McDykel's
like
the best.
It looks like what it is, which was a bunch of Japanese people trying to come up with American sounding names. But yes, Sleeve McDykel would without a doubt put up at least 65 points playing with Sidney Crosby.
Well, unless, by the way, I'm not suggesting that Chris Drury. All I'm saying is I understand the logic between having the conversation. I've already admitted my Alexis Lafreniere. I've made my point clear on that. That it's pretty obvious that I was wrong about what he is as a player, and the infuriating part of that is, seems like it's fully within his control to be that guy if he really wanted to be, and he just doesn't want to be, and I can't force him to do that. But I think it would be best for the player and the team for him to get a fresh start somewhere else. The problem is most of the trades now, if the Rangers needed to trade like Lafreniere and Schneider in a deal for Jason Robertson, I'm doing that in a heartbeat. Like, I'm not even thinking
Well, yeah, of
about that
course.
in that instance. So, I'm not sitting here telling you the Rangers should not trade Alexi Lafreniere. I'm just saying if the trade is like Alexi Lafreniere for Sleeve McDyke, probably rather just hold on to Lafreniere for a little bit and just see what you can do. Eric, any closing thoughts as you get snowed in? We're an hour and a half here. We've given the people
Yeah.
enough.
I just want to note that as I'm rereading through the list of these made up baseball player names, I think they were also pulling from NHL players of the time because I'll give you a couple other names here. The only one that sounds like a real person or could potentially be a real person is Glenn Allen Mixon. That sounds like an actual name. Like there's Glenn Allen Hill was actually a baseball player. So like all right, that's a first name that exists in baseball. But there is a Kevin Nogilny,
Yep, sure.
Nogilny, and there is a Bobson Dugnut. Throw back to the great Ron Tugnut. And I forgot, I think, my other favorite name from this, which is Todd Bonzalez. Bonzalez. Just absolute great stuff. So I'm glad, Joe, if for no other reason that we did this podcast so I could introduce you to Sleeve McDyke.
Oh, Sleeve McDyke's it's a hit. Blueshirtbanter.com, all your ad-free New York Rangers access, news, analysis, thoughts after dark. $85 a year. $40 a year gets you the community tier, which is basically you get the Discord and you get to comment on some stories, including the question thread that we read on this very show. 5 stars on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to us, youtube.com/BlueShirtBanter. Go ahead and subscribe and watch us over there. Facebook.com/BlueShirtBanter. Give it a like. Do whatever you do with Facebook for business purposes. Eric, anything else from you before we release the people to their lives?
If you don't hear from me before next week's podcast, please send people with shovels to dig me out of the 80 feet of snow that I think we're probably going to get.
And if you subscribe to the Fuck Eric Over tier, which is $1,000 a month, I will actually fly out to Grand Rapids and put more snow on his property.
Yeah.
So you could fund that little endeavor.
I would welcome that.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for listening. We will see you next week. Bye for now.